Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today it is time for the final regular season power rankings video of the 2025 UFL season. Yes, it is time for the playoff power rankings. This is the second to last power rankings of the entire season. Obviously, won't have one next week, but we'll have one after the playoffs. We're also going to be looking at each team's biggest regret this week. Now, when it comes to this week's power rankings, not much is really different. The fact is, this past weekend had a lot of games that were pretty much meaningless, a lot of backups played, but we did finally hit some marks, including the number 8 team breaking a pretty impressive record in a negative sense. So let's get started with number 8, the San Antonio Brahmas. Look, all I have to do is show the point differential. You broke the record for the worst in this era of spring football. In the UFL era, so the USFL, 2023, XFL, and UFL, they have broken it by a wide margin. The next closest team was the 2023 Orlando Guardians at minus 106. This team beat it by over 30. Yes, they did not hit the fabled 150 mark, which would have meant they lost basically on average every game they lost by 15 points. But damn, minus 138 is insanely bad. That's worse than the Showboats last year. That's worse than the 2022 Kirby Wilson-led Maulers. There's nothing to say. Look, I can bring up the absolutely terrible defensive stats, the offensive stats that are bad, but sometimes one stat can basically speak on how bad a team is, and in this case it does. Look, the Brahmas got blown out in so many games this season, it's insane. Even their points scored is another thing. The amount of points they scored total, again, 11 less than the 2022 Maulers. Awful. Over 20 points worse than the Roughnecks last year, put up absolutely no points, despite the fact they weren't as bad as the Showboats for different reasons. And hell, even the Guardians put up over 200 points. The Arlington Renegades were the only team that were even close, and they were at 146. So this team also, points for was insanely low. I'm pretty sure that is the worst all time. So what's there that's good about this team? Yes, they didn't allow as many points as, let's say, the Guardians did in 2023. But when you look at their team as a whole, it was bad. They played 2 good games against DC, and they had a good showing against Michigan. The entire rest of the season was terrible. And even those 3 games, they won a combined 1 and 2 in. So, it's hard to give this team any real credit. At the end of the day, when you break this kind of record, there's not much needs to be said. Now, their biggest regret on the season is going to be Kellen Mond. Yes, this is about the whole season. I may have said it in the beginning, but it's the Kellen Mond signing. Look, I can blame the quarterback room all we want. The whole issue is that they basically tried to bring in Mond as being this de facto exclusive QB1, and it totally backfired. Look, statistically compared to Kevin Hogan, it might look like he's, pretty on par. That's really not true. Pretty much all those interceptions came in that really bad game Hogan had in that, super tankle against Memphis. If you eliminate the Memphis game, he actually had significantly better stats than Kellen Mond. And in fact, his stats prove that he's a significantly better quarterback than Kellen Mond. You know how they prove it? Look at the passer rating. When you throw an interception, it annihilates. It eviscerates that stat. Yet you look at Kevin Hogan. Hogan had 2 more and still was only 2.5 points back from Kellen Mond. That's because Mond was completing less than 1.1, or he had less than a yard. He was not good. Look, he had 1.1 yards less per attempt than Kevin Hogan. Completion percentage-wise, he was 5% worse. And again, a lot of these stats for Hogan did tank in the Memphis game. On the ground, Mond was a better runner, but not really. He didn't run that much. He just ran slightly better than Kevin Hogan. Hogan also took less sacks. Yes, I know Mond technically played more than Kevin Hogan, but even if you do it a per game pretty much basis, overall Kevin Mond did end up taking more sacks pretty much. It's just, again, the Memphis game is where a lot of the bad stats for Hogan happened. If you were to eliminate Mond's worst game and eliminate Hogan's worst game, Hogan is a significantly better quarterback. The fact is, Mond, even week 10, proved that he's not the guy. It kind of proved that Zimmer was right to give up on him so fast in the NFL because, man, he was not good this season. Biggest regret is the entire Kellen Mond situation. Now, coming in at number 7 is going to be the Memphis Showboats. Again, not much to be said. Look, we'll get to the 2 5-5 teams, how their 5-5 records are heavily inflated. The point is, you finished 2-8 in the league where the third worst team was 5-5. You beat San Antonio, and you beat the team that is, a back-to-back-to-back champion in the Stallions. So you got 2 wins that are more impressive than any of the Brahmas wins, obviously. Well, because of the fact that, again, you beat the Brahmas, so head-to-head matters in this case. It was weeks ago, but even if you don't count that in terms of the last few weeks, again, one of these teams actually has 2 wins. One of them only has one. One of these 2 teams didn't even hit a 100-point differential on the negative side. The Brahmas broke the record. Now, stat-wise, worst third down percentage team in the league, even worse than the Brahmas. Now, points allowed, they're on that second half kind of. It was 6th in the league, so not great there. Yards per game allowed wasn't awesome. Biggest issue with turnover differential. Yes, this did tank in week 10 a lot, but even before that, we've talked about all season. They've been basically hovering around that -10 mark the entire year, which is just inexcusable. 5 takeaways, with literally 3 of them being in that San Antonio game. So again, even from Memphis' standpoint, if you eliminate the Memphis game, it gets even worse for them. Offensively, they're one of those 2 teams in the absolute bottom. Houston had a pretty poor year offensively, but again, they had over 260. Memphis and San Antonio both were under 240. Again, not much needs to be said here. This team was a failure. Now, their biggest regret is the QB room. I'm not going to blame Wisenhunt for having, again, we don't know if 100% sure, but we all assume health issues. The biggest risk, QB room. I called this like that. The minute I saw this quarterback room, I said it's not that good a QB room. And this is before they got Dresser when they had Quentin Dormady. I said that you needed to get somebody that had potential. Bring in 3 guys that you know are not going to get you a championship. You know are not going to lead you somewhere. They're just kind of there. They're solid. And guess what? That's what really screwed him over. Deneric Prince may not have been a top-tier running back, but he at least gave you enough during the year at certain points. What really screwed you over is that quarterback room. E.J. Perry and T. Will were almost the same quarterback. They were really high highs and really low lows. Dresser win, he gave you a couple games he looked okay, but in week 10, man, he was terrible. The fact is, I wouldn't be shocked if none of these guys return next year. It's just, I don't get how you could realistically go into this season with the quarterback room they had, even after you got rid of Dorman and got Wynn, and been like, yeah, man, this the one. This is the good quarterback room. It's what backfired on them. The defense was improving. They might not have gotten takeaways, but again, they still, like I said, were around that lower end, middle of the pack area in yards per game allowed and points allowed, despite not having takeaways. And despite the offense turning the ball over, that's a testament to how actually, kind of sneaky good this Showboat's defense is. Whereas the offense, the quarterback is just, it wasn't great. Didn't matter who came in, who got healthy, who got hurt. It just, the whole season was rough. They ended up throwing literally 5 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. They lost 3 fumbles. It's just, the biggest regret is this quarterback room. This was the biggest issue. I saw us coming a mile away, and it's what hurt them. Number 6 is the Roughnecks. You finished 5-5. Your last 2 wins were not impressive at all, especially, you were basically just playing backups, and it was meaningless football when you're getting wins. Yes, the DC win, I know, even when the Stars were in, but as I said, that win I don't really count too much because that's just a matchup nightmare for DC. Look, give credit where it's due. The Houston defense objectively is one of the best units in the league. If you eliminate their week 1 game where they allowed 460 yards, this team's yards per game allowed just plummets in a good way, obviously. They basically allowed around, 31.5 yards or overall total yards. So if you call it 32, you eliminate 400. You're going down literally full 100 or literally 12.5%. Obviously, though, you wouldn't have that. You'd probably still allow 200. Point is, that game absolutely decimated your yards per game allowed on the whole season. And even your points allowed, you ended up allowing 31 points in that game. You eliminate that, again, you're insanely high up there. You're averaging, or you're allowing literally just over 150 points allowed. So it's a great defense. Turnover differential ended up finishing the best in the league. Now, yes, a lot of this is because DC kind of fumbled the last couple weeks of the season, and Houston had a really solid week 10 against a Rocky Lombardi, Danny Etling-led Panthers team. They're still not as good as Arlington. Let's call it like it is. Arlington is a better team at this point, for how much I hate saying it. The fact is, Arlington's defense, I would trust them more over this Houston defense in an overall game. Now, obviously, the ending, which we'll get to in a second with Arlington, different story. But overall defense, I think Houston is still the 4th best unit in the league. I know some people have tried to act like this is the best unit in the league. They're a lot better than their stats show. And again, I think they're probably the 4th best unit in the league. I think that the 2 best are obviously Birmingham and St. Louis. Then you have Arlington and then probably Houston. A healthy Michigan is better, but, They're not exactly fully healthy even now with White coming off IR and all that. Overall, they're number 6 of the Roughnecks. I'm not going to put them higher. The offense hasn't been really good enough. But their biggest regret is, in fact, not starting McClendon from day one. Now, here's the thing. I think that some people don't fully understand why he is such an upgrade over both Anthony Brown and Nolan Henderson. The most important thing is the 3 turnovers. The 3 interceptions, we know a couple of them, especially one of them, they weren't, true interceptions. He threw very few truly pick-worthy plays. And even with the ones he did throw, he still ended up going 6 TDs to 3 interceptions. And again, comparing him to Nolan Henderson, the interception theory, right? Henderson had 0 interceptions, meaning he should be dominating McClendon in the passer rating stat, yet he's only ahead by 1.1, which proves how much better a quarterback McClendon was this season. Look, there's no denying Nolan Henderson's ground ability, his ability to run the football is incredible. Is it as good as Max Duggan or Manny Wilkins? No. Is it as good as Perkins? No. But is it like the top of that tier 2 list? Absolutely. Was he as accurate as McClendon? Hell no. He was about 10% less on that completion percentage. That's the biggest difference to why McClendon was a significant upgrade over Henderson. Jalen McClendon, if he starts this whole season, granted, the last couple weeks would play out differently with starters and all that, there's still a very real shot this team's in the playoffs. With him as the true quarterback, and yes, I know technically he only started like 6 games or something, but I'm obviously going to count the one against Birmingham where Henderson got hurt right at the beginning, right? So if you do that, Nolan and Brown went 1-2. They got their 1 win over Memphis, and then McClendon went 4-3. If he starts the entire season, there's a really solid chance that they end up finishing 6-4, hell, maybe even 7-3, depending on how certain things go. Because the first couple weeks, the issue was that this team was just not getting enough time. Mainly week 2. The week 2 Arlington game with McClendon, they win this game. They win that one easily. I mean, Anthony Brown nearly pulled it off, and I haven't even mentioned him for, yikes. The bottom line is McClendon was the big upgrade for this team. He is going to be the quarterback of the future unless he gets an NFL opportunity. He was by far the best quarterback this season. Again, for how well some of you might want to say Henderson was, the fact is McClendon was better. When you're talking about a 10% difference in completion percentage, you're able to keep so many more drives alive, and that goes with the yards per attempt. 1.4 yards per attempt better. That's an even bigger difference than we talked about with Hogan and Mond. So not only is he on a per-throw basis getting more yards than Nolan Henderson, but he's also completing more passes, meaning that let's say in those 2-minute drills where you got to keep the clock moving, he's actually throwing completions, whereas Henderson, not as much. And just during the course of the game, again, if you're averaging 5.1 yards per attempt, that's solid, but that's basically saying that you're either getting like a 10-yard pass or you're getting a 0-yard pass, whereas McClendon, more so you're actually kind of getting that average. So overall, McClendon, not starting him is the biggest regret. Number 5 is the Renegades. Congrats, you beat up on the Brahmas in a meaningless Week 10 game. I was wrong, blah, blah, blah. Congrats, you won 2 games that were absolutely meaningless. We'll talk about the biggest regret in a second, but there's nowhere else to really put this team. Look, Perez, because of that at the end of starting, basically pulled a Jordan Ta'amu in 2022, where he got the passing yard crown undeservedly, right? Jordan Ta'amu did not play the entire season. Perez did. It's like when Kyle Sloter would have gotten in 2022, but Ta'amu did because they rested Sloter, right? It's a hollow victory. You played Perez the whole game. He had a great game for what? So you couldn't figure out what backups he had. I know Allers played a teeny bit and didn't look good, but you still didn't give him a full game. Are you really believing he's going to be back next year? If he is, that's a topic for another day. Overall, though, great defense. Points allowed, 3rd best in the league. Again, they're pretty much heavily in that 3rd spot in points allowed. Yards per game, they're really solid, but again, I think that overall St. Louis has the best defense in the league, followed by Birmingham. Then Arlington, a slightly distant 3rd. Yards per game allowed, they may be 4th, but that's one of those stats where you have the top 4 teams, 5 and 6, then you have 7 and 8. So they're still not that bad there, but overall, man, not much I can really say. Number 5, the Renegades. Biggest regret is the midseason. Week 3 to Week 8. I mean, I talked about it a ton in that Missed the Playoffs video. The point is, you blew the season. The games like Birmingham, Michigan were inexcusable losses. People can try to blame the refs all they want. The refs did not give the Stallions the win. Yes, there were the very controversial fumble call and the false start. What really cost you is going 0-4 in the red zone, right? At some point you got to blame yourself in a certain scenario, and that's one of them. You kick a field goal, you at least get 12 points, you win in that theory. You blew that game, no excuse to lose that one. The DC one, almost forgot to mention the first DC game, where you literally blew the then largest lead in UFL history. Then the St. Louis rematch, you lost with a team only scoring 12 points. The fact that they have nearly lost, because they did lose 3 times where the defense held the team to under 15 points, but they also nearly lost to Houston in week 2. The defense gave you great performances, and the offense just said, nah, we're good. The Michigan game, you blew a literal last-second game. The only one that isn't even fully inexcusable is the DC game. Again, Wikipedia never fixed that. The score was not that. It was a 3-point game. You were in field goal range. Perez decided to call his own number, throw a fake spike, and cost his team the game single-handedly. So, every loss this season, you blew. You literally blew every single game you lost this season. That's the bottom line. And you should have lost to both St. Louis and arguably almost lost, or you arguably could have lost to Houston. But the first St. Louis one, again, 2 of your touchdowns were a player tearing his Achilles and you picked up a fumble and a pick 6 to end the game. So even then, you still almost lost despite getting a handicap. You blew the midseason. You deserve to miss the playoffs, but you get number 5 because I can't justify putting Houston above you. Number 4, DC. No shock here. Again, I think people have started to realize that DC's defense is not as good as people have been trying to make it out to be. Yes, you have a couple of great players and even a couple of DPOY candidates, but as an overall unit, it is by far the weakest unit in the playoffs. Again, Michigan is getting healthier. Granted, we did see Kenny H. Lovely go down, so we'll see exactly how healthy he is. Point is, it was getting healthier. DC's defense doesn't even matter how healthy they are because they haven't been nearly as banged up as some of those other defenses, and they've still been poor. Again, 204 points allowed is one of only 2 teams to do that, 200 or more, and they're because of this game against St. Louis, we're able to drop below it, but they've basically been at that 300 yards per game allowed. Again, one of like 2-3 teams the whole season. Not good. Third down percentage. You fell to third. You were number 1. Yes, you still have an incredible percentage. 46.2 is nothing to scoff at. But you were number 1, and you kept falling and falling and falling, and now you're third. Then, yards per game. Yes, you're still number 1. You did beat Michigan officially by 25 yards. A lot of that is because of the offense. This offense is essentially F it, go deep. That's basically the offense. It is throw Hail Marys basically every 2 plays. Hope that at least one of every 4 connects. Now, whether it be because a receiver drops a pass or Tiamu just completely whiffs the throw, you got a good shot at both happening or catching it for a big gain. Hence why Tiamu finished with by far the league lead in passing touchdowns. Now, he is probably going to be the MVP winner, though. Obviously, we all agree he is not the best quarterback in the league. Perkins was the best QB in the league, and hell, Jamar Smith has been a better quarterback ever since he came on the team. But Tiamu played basically the whole season, got his stats really high, not really padded them. This wasn't a Dak Prescott Cowboys where he literally just pads his stats every week and he gets undeserved yards. Tiamu was doing it to win games, I'll say that. But his system is very quarterback friendly. Again, Mike DeLillo being in there mainly in that Week 9 game, you saw literally no difference. In Week 10, you did see a bit of a difference, but again, that's a guy getting his like a real start versus Tiamu who's been in this league for a while. Overall, though, not much more to say than number 4. They're pretty clearly 4th. Again, the Michigan team with a backup quarterback is borderline as good as this team in all honesty, but number 4, DC, it's the main reason why them beating St. Louis would be such a massive upset. I mean, heading into Week 10, they were by far the lowest favored team to win the championship for good reason. Them beating St. Louis would be a huge black eye on Anthony Beck's coaching career at the Battlehawks, even worse than last year, obviously. And it would be arguably the biggest upset in this era of spring football. I know some would still say the Renegades over the Roughnecks or DC, which again are both valid ones. But aside from maybe those, this would be the biggest upset because DC has no business being St. Louis. But their biggest regret is their ground game being led by Abram Smith. The fact that he still ended up finishing the season with the most carries is baffling. The fact is, like I said, Abram Smith, I hate that it happened to him. He got hurt, but he's one of those guys that clearly is not the same from an injury. Or it's what other people are saying, that's saying that the 2023 defenses were all watered down. People use that argument against like Mark Thompson and Alex Magoo. You could use that same thing against Abram Smith arguably as well. The fact is, whatever the case is, whether it be because of the injury, defense being better, or both, Abram Smith was, of main starting running backs, the worst in the entire league. Deion Jackson, at first glance, his stats look incredible, but if you look a bit deeper, you see the issue with him. The biggest issue is that if he has 83 total carries, eliminate his largest three. That's what I always like to do, is eliminate the longest rush of a game, because that shows how good the running back actually played. Eliminate the three largest carries. The 57-yard against Arlington, the 28-yard against St. Louis, and the 20-yard against Arlington in the other matchup. What you end up getting is a 3.9 yards per attempt. That's still a better number than a lot of other players, but that's still not a great number, right? The biggest issue with him is pretty much every game he's going to give you one really good rush. He's going to give you almost a guaranteed 10-plus yard rush per game. But then the rest of the game, he's not really going to do that much. Is he better than Abram Smith? Yes. Smith isn't even getting you those long carries that often. But the biggest issue is that with Jackson, he's still not getting you yardage consistently. That's why I think this team is such a bad playoff team. A playoff team is a good ground game and a great defense. This DC team is a horrible defense with a very bad ground game. I mean, I know I joked about it last week saying that, super ass and ass, and it is true. This DC ground game at no point has looked impressive. They had 1 week where Te'amu randomly ran for 70 yards and looked okay because of him. But if he's not doing it, you're not getting enough production from Smith and Jackson. I mean, we've joked about in the past about how, the Trey Williams, Darius Victor combo, the combo at home version of Garrett Groshek and Madre London from the Maulers. In a lot of ways, this is like the off-brand version of Maribel in person. I know Maribel hasn't been as great in years past, but this is like the value version brand of that, right? CJ Maribel, Ricky Person, that's a championship backfield. Deion Jackson or Amos Smith, that's not a championship backfield. If they win the championship and it's because of these guys, it would be the biggest shocker in the history of this era of spring football. Because at no point this season have they given you any indication that, hey, this ground game is a good unit. So biggest regret for the DC defenders is this ground game, having to be led by Smith and just overall not being good. Number 3 is the Michigan Panthers. You stay at number 3. You did lose, but again, you were literally playing your third-string quarterback and your second-string quarterback that everybody just hates. And even then, it was a lot closer than the game was. Again, we'll talk about more in the week review. But even in that game, you had an incredible first drive. A bad snap ended up having you lose the football. Then you had another drive where you had a touchdown, but then, a penalty got called on a challenge, and you lost it. So you had 2 drives that basically could have ended in touchdowns that you ended up not getting because of things that happened, and you still ended up having a chance to win the game late. So credit to them, it was a much closer game than the final score indicated. Overall, though, you're still number 3. You still haven't beaten Birmingham, can't justify that, and St. Louis hasn't lost a game in forever. So I can't justify that. Turnover differential, you're with San Antonio and Birmingham in that, tied second to worst at -2. Yards per game, you did finish second at best. And again, defensively, the stats aren't incredible, mainly the yards per game allowed. The points allowed is still really solid, but again, a lot of that is injury issues. Seeing how healthy Speaks was, he did play a decent amount this past week, so that's good. Will Javin White be back? Will Kenny H. Lovely be back? A lot of questions like that. Third down percentage, best in the league. Not much to say with the top 3 teams. Number 3, the Michigan Panthers. Biggest regret is not sticking with Perkins. Now, the last 2 weeks are different. Obviously, will last 3 weeks because of the fact of trying to keep him healthy, but I know that's another issue for another day about why he didn't play in the Roughnecks game. This past one, he should play a little bit. Your 2 losses during the first 7 weeks of the season when Perkins was legitimately healthy were 2 games where Danny Etling played. St. Louis game, he came in through an interception, which ended up giving St. Louis a score, and wouldn't you guess it, they won by 5. Then the Birmingham game. Now, that wasn't the biggest reason. Again, that's more so of that's a legit what if. The St. Louis game is pretty clear. If Perkins played, they would have won that game, but the Birmingham one is definitely a what if. The fact is the special teams unit played terribly, and even Perkins wasn't great in that game. That was his weakest game all season. But as him being the true number 1 starter, they never lost. In the one game where he was playing, but then he got hurt and Etling came in, and that's different. As the full-time starter, as a true full-time starter, they were undefeated with Perkins. And I think that it's pretty obvious they should have just kept him in at quarterback 1. I don't know why they ever put in Etling. Yes, I understand that Etling, was pretty solid up until the playoffs last year. He got them that winning record. See, people seem to forget that Etling was the main quarterback last year. Perkins only played the last 2 weeks, and he only played, half the games, obviously, with Lewerke. But Perkins should have been the day 1 starter, true day 1 full-time starter. They should never have had to wait till, after they lose to St. Louis to do that. But what are you going to do at this point? Number 3, the Panthers. Number 2, the Birmingham Stallions. You beat up on a Showboats team that, again, like I said, we don't know the future holds, but if it's the end for the Showboats, it's a fitting end. Point is, I'm not moving them up. You beat the Showboats. I don't have a reason to move you above number one at this point. Number one also legitimately rested starters. Birmingham didn't at all until the second half. Yes, your defense finished the best points allowed team, but like I said, I think that overall St. Louis is still a better unit than you. But again, these top two defenses are pretty clearly the top two defenses. Turnover differential, that's a big reason why I can't fully justify putting you up there. You still are at -2. I know you've been hovering at that for a while, but that basically means that you've been stuck at a 0 turnover differential the last 6 weeks, and that's not good either. Third down percentage, you've been moving up, and up. Now you're second best in the league. Again, a lot of that was because this Memphis game, they went some insane 75% in it. You have the best return game in the league, which they've had for a few weeks. Again, not much different to say. Jamar Smith currently looks like healthy quarterback, so not counting Perkins at this moment. He looks like the best quarterback in the league. Will he continue that in the playoff game? We'll see. Overall, though, this Birmingham team is definitely good enough to win another championship game. But I think that number 2 is where they have to be. Again, it's just, I don't punish teams that don't do anything wrong and reward a team unless it's a true different thing. Like if they had done this to, let's say, a DC team playing their full starters, then yeah, I'd put them above St. Louis. But I'm not going to put you above St. Louis, who in a backup v backup battle beat DC, and they were playing even more backups than DC was and still won that game, and then you beat a Showboats team. Yeah. Biggest regret. Marketing. Look, credit to them. The bottom line is, on a football perspective, there's really not a single regret for Birmingham. I tried, you maybe could say not trying to get another running back, but I mean, if you guys are working fine, you don't really need to change anything. Quarterback-wise, it was injury after injury, and yes, you may have lucked into Jamar. You'd say, oh, they should have kept Jamar. You can't say that. It was injuries that literally just changed everything for him. Defensively, they've been a great defense. Even special teams-wise, they've been great. Football-wise, there's really not a single regret I have for Birmingham. So I have to go to marketing. Again, I know we usually talk about it in this week review and don't keep this in the power rankings, but this is, legitimately, this is a good thing for Birmingham and Skip Holtz, is there's no real football regret. It's just the attendance was really disappointing this year, right? They finished averaging a little under 9K. Obviously, that's because the Week 7 Mother's Day 11 a.m. game. But even without that, they only had 2 games above 10K, and they were barely above 10K. Birmingham last year had 4 games above 10K. The playoff game, which obviously should be above 10K this year. The St. Louis game against AJ McCarron, the Week 3 home opener, and then Week 8. They had 2 other games over 7K. The Stallions this year never had a game that low aside from Week 7. So in terms of consistency, they were actually more consistent than last year. But overall numbers, they were worse than last year, even if you eliminate the Week 7 game. So, I mean, like I said, football-wise, there's no real regret for this team. They did everything right. Would I have liked to see Smith rest the whole game? Sure, but I do understand why he played, and in fact, I'll get to that biggest regret in the next team, which is number 1, the Battlehawks. I'm not going to punish you for being on a 6-game winning streak. I think it's wild that I know that there's going to be a lot of people, mainly on the Twitter sphere, because again, everybody has their own opinion, but to me, I think it's crazy the kind of hoops people jump through to not give the Battlehawks credit. And this is coming from a guy who will say first and foremost that they historically, not this season, but historically have been one of the more overrated teams, right? The 2023 team, people saying they deserved a playoff spot. No, you lost to the Dragons in Week 9. You did not deserve a playoff spot in Week 9 in the playoffs. Last year, team was better than people give it credit for. Not really. The offense never was that good aside from a 2-week stretch in midseason. The offense was the biggest reason they couldn't beat the Brahmins. The Brahmins were a better team. This year, it's the opposite. This is a great team, but everybody wants to blame everything around them, find a little issue here and there. Now, yes, do I have an issue with Max Duggan? Yes, I'll get to that in a second. But objectively speaking, you did finish with the second best point differential in the league. You were just less than 10 points under Birmingham, so you were basically right there. You did finish 8-2. That's the best record in the entire league. I know it was 3 weeks ago, but it was a starter v starter game. You did beat Birmingham head-to-head. I usually don't use head-to-head once it's a couple weeks old, and even this late in the season. But again, if you're talking about a tiebreaker, which team won head-to-head? St. Louis. Which team is riding a massive win streak? St. Louis. They started 2-2, and even their losses, the only bad loss was DC. The Arlington one, again, was a good loss. They showed really good. They had a good performance in that game. Like I said, you got spotted an 8-point handicap, or Arlington got spotted an 8-point handicap, and it wasn't for bad play calling where they didn't use Jacob Sailors in the end zone or in the red zone, they may have won that game. So why would I punish them? They also beat Michigan. Yes, there's the Danny Etling thing, but again, that's another thing. It's just a matter of they match everything Birmingham did. Birmingham, we swept Michigan. So did St. Louis. They only played them once, but they still did it. Who won head-to-head? Birmingham. Birmingham, who was one of their losses to? Memphis. Did St. Louis lose to Memphis? No, they beat them by 10. So I got to give it to them. Again, their Week 10 win was the most impressive because, again, I know Birmingham put up almost the 2023 level of insanity against the Showbits this past week. But which is more impressive? A backup v backup game where you actually played more backups and then beat the DC Defenders in DC, or beating up a Memphis team in Memphis? Kind of obvious. Yes, DC missed a couple of field goals. They had the one block, the one miss. Overall, St. Louis also had a couple miscues, and they were literally playing their fourth string quarterback for part of the game, for God's sake. So, number one, St. Louis. Biggest regret to me, though, is not playing Duggan and Sailors in Week 10. Arguably even Week 9 to an extent. I've said it the whole year. This team, in theory, should win it all. The reason that they might not is Duggan and Sailors. Sailors is still a great running back, but he hasn't been consistent on the ground. He's been pretty much great on the passing game, on the screen pass the whole year, but on the pure ground side of it, he's been about 50-50 all season from being really good and mediocre to poor. He played like one half in Week 9 and then didn't see the field in Week 10. Max Duggan, he played one half in Week 9. Silvers came in, looked better than him. Silvers then played again in Week 10 and looked better. That's the biggest concern. And the reason is the throwing motion and the pocket passing ability. Silvers is just a better pocket passer. And that's not a good thing for Duggan. Look, Duggan's ground ability is crazy. He can run really well. And again, that Week 9 game, a lot of credit to him. He did what he did in the air without running the ball. Yes, when he gets no pressure, he's good. But Silvers is able to do more with pressure because of his throwing motion. I know I beat it like a dead horse on stream, but when you have that long wind-up throwing motion like Max Duggan has, it just opens the door for a lot of issues to where you need your O-line to be at their best. That's the thing. When he has time, he is a great pocket passer. But you don't have that much time forever. And again, DC's defense might not be good, but they have pass rushers. They have Joe Wallace. They have Malik Fisher. They're going to do damage to Duggan. And once they're doing that, that's where it gets concerning. I would have loved to see both Sailors and Duggan play in Week 10 or play a bit more in Week 9 to get some more rhythm going, to get better for the playoff game. But that's all I can say. Overall, this has been Zom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the bell. Let me know down below what your power rankings are. Again, I had no changes from last week to this week. I think there was really nothing that deserved to be changed from last week to this week. And now that pretty much the bottom, 4 teams especially, have basically been the same for the past 4 weeks. There hasn't been really anything to change it. I think I changed the Renegades, Roughnecks at one point, but overall it's been about the same. Think about becoming a community member as well. It's as low as 99 cents a month. You get an exclusive monthly video even during the off season. You get team emojis you get to use in the comments and comments of live streams. You get exclusive community posts and all that. And as always, guys, have a great night.